Welcome to the Healthful Woman Podcast. Today's Monday, August 17th, 2020. Today's the third installment in our three-part miniseries on fertility, and the topic for today is gestational carriers, also known as surrogate pregnancy. Pregnancy with the help of a gestational carrier is a fascinating topic on many levels and is becoming more and more prevalent. To present this topic, I wanted to focus on the experience of the people involved rather than the medical side. Truth is, the medical part is relatively straightforward. It is IVF, but instead of transferring the embryo into the genetic mother, it's transferred into the carrier. So today, we're going to focus on the people involved, and to do that, we have two podcasts. In the first podcast, I'm joined by my dear friends, Adina and Simon Brief, who discuss their own experience having their third child, Joey, who was born about 1 year ago with the help of a gestational carrier. Adina and Simon are amazing people, and I'm so grateful they were willing to share their story. I'm certain you will find it inspiring. In the second podcast, I speak with Adrian Van Ardsel, who was their carrier. Adina and Simon suggested I interview Adrian, and she was also so kind to agree to talk about her experience as a surrogate. She is a unique and giving woman, and her story is also truly inspiring. Since we're on this topic, I also wanted to give a big shout out to Joey Brief on the occasion of his first birthday this upcoming Sunday. Joey, happy birthday. This is an amazing event for you, but also your parents, your family, and your whole community. Along with Cooper and Coco, you make all of us very proud. You've accomplished so much already in 12 months. We expect big things from you. For all of you listening, enjoy the podcast. On Thursday, Stephanie Melka and I talk about exercise and pregnancy, and then next week, we have a real treat for you, Yoga Week. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Welcome to today's episode of Healthful Woman, a podcast designed to explore topics in women's health at all stages of life. I'm your host, Dr. Nathan Fox, an OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist practicing in New York City. At Healthful Woman, I speak with leaders in the field to help you learn more about women's health, pregnancy, and wellness. Okay, we're here with Adina and Simon Brief, who are friends of mine. I'm very fortunate to count you guys amongst my friends. And you guys are the parents of three amazing children, Cooper, Coco, and baby Joey, who are 6, 4, and almost 1. And we're talking today about gestational carriers, or what some people call surrogacy, part of your story and your family. And thank you so much for coming on to talk about this important topic. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that our listeners are going to appreciate it and learn so much from you guys. So thank you for sharing or agreeing to share your story with me and with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to share part of our story.
Tell our listeners like a little bit about yourselves, who you are, where you're from, where do you live, how do we know each other, so they get sort of a sense of where you are in life right now.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Nadi's listening.
Hello.
My name is Simon Brief, and I'm sitting next to my lovely wife, Adina Beth Brief. We are actually about to hit our 10-year anniversary in 7 days. Grew up in the Upper West Side of New York, spent a lot of time in the Northeast, little time in Israel. Another great story for another podcast. Adina and I met through my now brother-in-law, who was my roommate in college and good friend. I think he's still my good friend too.
Well, we'll see about that, but yeah.
We'll see about that. About 5 years ago, we moved to Englewood, and that's when we had the other huge change in our life, which is when we met Nady Fox. And it's been great since then. We're excited to be on the podcast, so you can hear that in the sound of my voice.
Right, and Adina, of course, I've known your sister for some time because she's also a maternal fetal medicine specialist, and I think that was my first entree to your family, at least. And I've met your family, you've known many people in your family also just through various connections and whatnot. And it was so pretty cool when you guys moved into our neighborhood and we got to know you and your family.
It's definitely a small world. Never did I think one day I would be on Nady Fox's podcast, but pretty cool.
It was a long-term plan to lure you guys into Englewood and then get you to, have a baby with a carrier just so I can get you on a podcast that hadn't been created yet. These are very, very deep-seated plans that I create. Tell us your story. How did you come to even, the world of gestational carriers, and like how did that come about for you guys?
In September of 2015, we had our baby girl, Coco, and she was a scheduled C-section. And up until that C-section, everything was going very smoothly. Nothing was abnormal, nothing concerning. And then, they started the C-section and Coco was out and healthy and safe and beautiful. And then the doctor tried to remove my placenta. And at that time, she was having a lot of trouble. And all of a sudden, I hear this like urgency in her voice. And she said, I need the attending in here now. Every second counts. She's losing a lot of blood. And at that point, the anesthesiologist turns to me and he's like, okay, I'm going to be giving you some extra medicine here. You're going to feel very calm and relaxed. So I was very calm, but my doctor, not so much.
Just to be clear, I got no calming medicine at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say, Simon, you're in the room and you're definitely not getting injected anything. So this is you're witnessing this happen, and it's obviously very quick, and it must have been pretty intense at that time. And this is also just to clarify, this is Coco's your second.
Yes, the attending rushes in and confirms what my doctor thought she saw, which was a placenta accreta. And in my case, it was actually an 80% placenta accreta, which means that the placenta was attached to the uterus.
Right, like it's stuck there.
Of course, you can explain that a lot better than I can.
No, you explained it. You explained it great. You got it.
And so the only option at that point was to perform a partial hysterectomy, which was basically a life-saving operation. And she was able to leave my ovaries, but remove my uterus. And at that time, I'll never forget how my dad described this whole situation. He said it was like walking away from a horrific car crash without a single scratch. So like this can obviously go very wrong. They have a placenta accreta center in New York City, just for this exact thing. If you lose too much blood, they have extra blood ready for you and everything else. So the fact that this was a total surprise and, my doctor did the most unbelievable job and we ended up with a healthy baby girl, and my recovery was actually easier from that delivery than from Cooper's because I had to go into labor and then an emergency C-section with him.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you didn't have labor for Coco, you mean? You just had the scheduled C-section.
Right.
What I would say is that Adina is, I knew she was tough, but she's incredibly tough and resilient. And I was so impressed with her recovery and just her both physical and mental abilities going through this.
Yeah, I was going to say when you said that she's tough and resilient, there's the physical nature of that because, obviously Dina's, for those who don't know you, you're an athlete, you're in great shape, you exercise all the time. There's the emotions of having a baby, right? Just to start off with, which is very, it's a lot. And then on top of that, you're basically being told at the same time, hey, you could have died, but you didn't, right? That's a lot to process. B, you don't have a uterus anymore, which is a lot to process. And C, potentially you can't have any more children. Right? Which is sort of what it obviously is not the case. And that's why we're talking today. But that is sort of the thing that goes through your head. Can I no longer have children because of this? What point did it hit you that like, hey, this means no more uterus, no more babies? Like, was that immediate or did it take like a while to process that?
We kind of overheard what the doctor was saying. It wasn't super clear because, that sheet is up between me and the doctor. But Simon was able to kind of peek over before they did the partial hysterectomy. He said, stop, wait, what are you guys doing? Because he realized the gravity of the situation. And I'll never forget that. I was just like, thank God he's here because, I have no ability to speak up. I was just so relaxed and kind of floating almost.
That's actually one of my prouder life moments. I've been in situations in my life where I haven't spoken up, and I feel like when it mattered probably the most in my entire life, even though I was the least medically educated person in the room, including much less educated than my wife on this matter.
Maybe even the baby.
Maybe even the baby. Thank you for being inclusive of one, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Coco's she's precocious, so she may have known a lot coming out.
She did. She's very intuitive. So yes.
So I think that was the first moment where Simon realized, holy smokes, this is real. This is going down. Let me just see if I can gather any information before they make this decision.
It was like in that moment, became a mix of emotions very quickly, from pure joy about Coco and this baby to just there was something else, another emotion that was there at the time.
Yeah.
And it was it was very prominent and evident. And it's almost as though I didn't want it to be there, but had to be able to be with that because it's hard.
It's really interesting. I mean, the way that you described the situation. I mean, I've unfortunately been on the other end of that situation, and when this happens, and sometimes a placenta accreta, like you said, where the placenta stuck to the uterus. Sometimes it's expected. We think it's going to be that way based on ultrasound, based on history, based on whatever MRI, and we're sort of prepared for that, and everyone walking to the room is prepared for it. But sometimes it's a complete surprise because they don't always look different on ultrasound, and your risk walking into the surgery, it wasn't zero, but it wasn't that high, and so it wasn't to be expected. And so we've been in that situation. It's very possible that actually they told you what was going to happen, but it just didn't. It just went over your heads because there's so much going on that it didn't process. Because it's unusual that we would start a hysterectomy without telling the woman, her partner, who are both there and awake and sitting 3 feet from us. So I wonder if it even was spoken about, and it just totally, through all of the commotion, didn't register, or you didn't hear it, and you're like, wait, what's going on here? These things are so, the way people remember them is so, it may have been different. I don't even know. I assume they told you.
I think the doctor did say, we are now going to do a hysterectomy.
Correct.
And
Right.
that's the moment that Simon said, wait, why? We didn't understand the why.
Right.
Yeah.
That's when she left out.
So one thing, and I'm going to mention this because it's critical to the story. Adina's doctor actually, she called in the attending. I'm not sure if the attending called in someone else, but the chief, I don't remember this, but basically they called in a very senior person that deals with this. Maybe you would know better than I.
Right.
Better than me. And this person literally said, "Oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like this before."
Oh, great. That's so comforting.
Sure. And I remember being there like, oh, that's like, number one on a top 10 list of things you don't want to hear in this situation.
Yeah. I always, oh man. One of the things that when we're training residents on C-sections operations, one of the things I always say before we walk in the room to them is, remember, everybody in this room is awake. They are listening. This is not the situation where the anesthesiologist puts someone to sleep and you can walk in and you can say whatever you want, known as NAD or trauma. Like, everyone's awake, so we're going to talk in a certain way that does not freak people out. And so, but sometimes it doesn't always go down that way. But okay, so listen, thank God they did the right thing. Absolutely, positively saved your life. You recovered, and that sort of realization that you've had a hysterectomy and all those emotions. How long did it take you to sort of think about or consider the possibility of actually having more kids? I imagine at one point it was like, all right, we're not having more kids. And then at some point it's like, well, maybe we can. Was that within a day, a month, a year? How long did it take to sort of start that thought process even?
On day 2 of recovering in the hospital, one of the doctors in the practice was making rounds, and she stops by to check in on me. And she was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You're so young. I was 28 at the time. And I'm sitting there holding baby Coco, who is the most perfect baby in the whole world. And she looks at me and she says, there's a lot of ways and there are a lot of options if you want more babies. And I remember that moment because all I wanted to do was just I didn't even want to address the hysterectomy for whatever reason. I just wanted to sit there, celebrate Coco. I'm going to cry. And I told myself I wasn't going to cry.
Go for it. You deserve it.
Yeah. This is the place.
Embrace Coco and celebrate her and enjoy that moment, right? Because being in the hospital is hard enough. There's lots of emotions. But then I'm now here mourning this loss that I didn't know was coming, and I was definitely not prepared for. So it was a big pill for me to swallow, not being able to carry any more babies. I'm one of 5, as you know, and I've always dreamed of a big family. I love kids. Obviously, I'm at that moment, I'm beyond thankful for Cooper, my older son, and especially grateful for Coco. But I knew deep down, even that moment, 2 days later, that I just had more love to give. And I knew whatever it was, I was going to start looking into these options. So the first day that we actually looked into the gestational carrier option was 3 months when Coco was 3 months old.
Mm.
We walk into the first fertility assisted facility and started the conversations.
I will say there was a point in between those points where, at least, I don't know whether I know I had a conversation with your dad, who passed away a little over 3 years ago now, but who was a major figure and influence in both of our lives, who was a doctor and a rabbi, and he basically said, like, halachically, it's all like you can do this, and really, I would say, encouraged us looking at this option as well. So
medically,
medically
Yeah.
and halachically, which
Yeah.
is Jewish.
Yeah.
So I felt a strong sense of encouragement from him on that front, and that was very meaningful to me and to Adina.
Yeah, I think that it's, you're talking about such a profound set of emotions that you have to go through after a delivery like that. Like you said, you have, on the one hand, tremendous gratitude. I mean, you have a beautiful son, have a beautiful baby girl. You're alive and well. Like, your life is like it's top of the world. Everything's amazing. And on the flip side, you've just had this, major operation that's going to potentially change the rest of your life and your ability to have more children, which is, a huge thing to sort of grapple with. And, and then on top, then you start to feel guilty and all these things that, when you have that conflict of like gratitude and grief at the exact same time, causes a lot of havoc. And I think that, people come to gestational carrier decision from many different roads. And I think one of them is the road that you came through, where like it is just not physically possible to carry a pregnancy because your uterus is removed. Like, you're healthy, your ovaries are healthy, like otherwise you'd be having lots of babies. Other people come to it because they never had children and they have medical problems and they're not well enough to carry a baby potentially, or they've had various bad complications in pregnancy and it's just not safe for them, or it's thought that the baby won't be able to stay. And that's sort of a different situation. Those people typically don't have kids already, and it's sort of a different decision-making process that comes into play. But I think that, like you said, with the support of, your father, Dina, and, other family and friends, and when you sort of are able to come to that decision and saying, well, I'm perfectly fine. This is like just like sort of an odd situation I got put in, but otherwise I'm perfectly okay. And there's a workaround. It may be, I don't know. I don't know if it makes it easier to come to that decision or not. I'm not sure. What do you think?
So it definitely was not an easy decision. I think I said that way too. It was just a very cursory response, but
easier, not easy. I don't think anyone comes to this decision easily.
No, I definitely struggled for a long time, and for months and months and months, it was really all I could think about, all I could talk to Simon about. Sorry, Simon. It was a lot, and we weren't telling a lot of people at first.
Yeah, I had one quick thing in there.
Sure.
I think the point you made, Nadia, about the blessing, the gratitude, and the grief, what was really tricky about that time, announcing Coco's birth and around it, was that this idea that we weren't really sharing the grief aspect of it. So to me, I mean, with immediate family and a couple of people that were close with us, I didn't feel like it was mine to share. And I don't think you really, I'm being honest. I don't think you felt like you wanted to make that so public, right, which I understand. Right. And I think that there was something complicated in that. And I think that idea of public and private about this type of matter threads through many of the other decisions we have to make, and also threads through some of the guilt or shame that kind of came with that experience, as well as kind of the going back and forth, kind of tied in and threaded through that.
Right. What were your concerns going into it, Aditi? You said you had a lot of concerns, you grappled with it. What was it specifically that you were worried about?
Oh my gosh. A lot of it was, like I said, we have Cooper, we have Coco, we have a boy, we have a girl, they're healthy. Are we going to go through all this and then God forbid the baby not be healthy, or God forbid our carrier not be healthy. I was concerned about, what would the relationship look like with this person? How are we going to even find a person who's willing to carry a baby for us? Like, that was just mind blowing to me that someone would choose to do that. And it still is mind blowing to me. It's absolutely remarkable. And there were just so many concerns, like how are the kids going to respond to this? We're going to have to travel a lot and leave them and visit the carrier for different medical appointments and a bunch of moving pieces that were scary. And then,
can I add something in? I mean, and I mean this in a positive way, or maybe even just neutral, which is that we're two white Jewish straight cis people in America that have had a lot of good fortune, and this was a flick of God's wrist and the universe's wrist that took us in a totally different direction that we hadn't even considered before. And it was like all of a sudden we were in an unknown place that was contrary to expectations of having more children. And, in light of everything that Adina said, it was like, damn, we're like opened our eyes after this experience and now we're here. And that was different. I think that there's inside of what you also said, I think for us, there was a lot of like social stigma. It's like, this isn't the way that it's done. And it's also, like, I'm speaking for you now based on what I remember, but I think for you, it's like, oh, like I won't have the feeling of the baby being in my belly, and I won't have the feeling of these things that felt like they were the milestone toward being a mother and to that fulfilling that desire and experience and role. And I think that was really strenuous and difficult.
Definitely. Like you said, Nadine, people get to learn about gestational carriers for a lot of different reasons. And I'm guessing the majority of them have not had babies before. So we were in a unique situation where I carried 2 babies. I enjoyed being pregnant. I had amazing pregnancies and, nursed my kids. Everything that comes along with being pregnant, I loved and was so grateful for. So this was going to be a very different route to having a baby, and all the unknowns were concerning.
Right. And I want to touch a little bit on what you guys are saying, because the first set of sort of concerns you had sounded, I would like categorize them as like logistical, like how do we do this? Like who do we find? Is this a possibility? We've got kids at home, it's sort of like, because it's an unknown, you have no idea like how this is going to actually happen. And then Simon, what you were talking about is sort of this like internal conflict between we're doing it this way, but we've always done it this way, and it's sort of different. And am I going to feel different because I'm not, pregnant, like all these things. But I'm curious, did you have concerns like about external type of stigma, like that people would think of you differently or think this was, I don't know what people think about, what they're worried about, but did you have any concerns about what like your friends, your family, or the outside world would think of you two going through this process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, right now, when you mention it, it just seems so normalized to me. So I'm like, why would anyone have stigma around this? But
right.
Yes, before going in, I was terrified. I thought, would I lose friends over this? I didn't know, like, how would the rabbi feel about this? How would our people in the shul? I can't just show up to shul one day with a baby, not being pregnant. And what are they going to think if I, had this carrier? For sure. I definitely thought a lot about how the community and friends and family would take it. As soon as I started to tell people, almost everyone said, oh my gosh, I went through something similar, or I know someone going through that, or I struggled with infertility and went to the same clinic you did. And one by one, everyone started opening up, and it was just this like huge relief. And I felt like I had this dark, like dirty, bad secret that I wasn't sharing. And then as soon as I started to share it, this fear and this stigma that I thought was going to be a huge problem ended up being an absolute inspiration. Yeah.
Right.
It was
Simon,
incredible.
did you have the same concerns going in?
For me, it was a little different. And I would go back to Adina after this to have her say like what was her turning point, if she feels comfortable saying that. Because for me, I don't really think I had that so much that stigma about this for two reasons. One, I'm not the, I wasn't the woman in the situation.
Right.
So I didn't, it wasn't like I felt the loss through what Adina was experiencing through listening to her and talking with her. But it's just different from where I stood
Sure.
and our circumstances. And the other is, I think I'm on some matters, I definitely care about what people think a lot, and I'm not released from that or beyond that, liberated from that. But I will say, in a matter like this, I genuinely didn't care.
Right. I hear you.
I didn't. I really didn't care about this because this was a matter for me
Right.
that was like so core and important that if we were going to do it, I didn't care at all about what other people thought. The harder thing was, and this was the kind of turning point for me on this, and then I'll check to you, Adina. The harder part was kind of yes or no, right? Just saying, are we going to go for this or not? And not how do we do it logistically, but how do we mentally prepare for it? So the turning point for me was, I'll keep it really brief. We had a offsite at my job, and part of it included like writing up a plan for where you are in a year. And in that moment, like, and you wrote that little thing from where you were in a year from where you are now, like a year out, looking back. And part of what I wrote is like, I wrote that we pursued this process. And for me, it was like a switch kind of flipped in my head when I put that on paper, because we had just been going back and forth on this matter a lot. And I wrote that, and then I don't think that fully took you all the way there, or me, but as soon as I became firm on it, and Adina has been the one that's pushed forward every decision in our relationship to get engaged, get married, have kid one, move to the suburbs, have kid two. But on this one, I think I was like the one that planted the flag.
Yes. So thank you to that Google offsite for the inspiration. But so I started seeing a therapist after the hysterectomy, the first time in my entire life that I saw a therapist. And it was very, very helpful. And through, all our discussions, she said one thing to me that stuck with me and helped me move forward in this decision. And she said, Adina, you're trying to make pros and cons. You're trying to make all these lists and really, really think this through. But what you're trying to do is rationalize having a baby. And babies are irrational to begin with.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Trying to rationalize having a baby just is not going to work. If you want a baby, you don't need to have a reason why you want a baby.
Yeah. That's
you
so wise. Yeah. I mean, listen, I tell people in any circumstance, having kids is gruesome. I mean, it's like you got to be pregnant, you got to deliver them, you got to raise them. I mean, they ask you for money. It's like, it's unbelievable. But that's not, we don't make a spreadsheet to figure out why we want to have kids. Like, it's innate, it's internal. And I do want to disagree with you, Simon, when you say that you care what people think. I've seen the color pants you wear in public. I don't know if you really care what people think about other things. But it's, and it's also, it's so interesting. The things you're talking about, people used to say the same thing about doing IVF, right? 25 years ago, there was a stigma. They thought no one did it, or they thought people would, shame them. And then having an egg donor or adoption and all these sort of advances we'd had either logistically or medically, and the ability for people to, have children and raise families have just become more common. I think also, nowadays, one of the other routes that people get to gestational carriers is if two men are having a baby together, they frequently go through a gestational carrier, and that's more common. And that's obviously over the years, become more, mainstream and acceptable. And it's part of culture. And so people are talking about this more. And so you said you were, maybe surprised, or you were pleased to see how many people were supportive and encouraging and knew about this. Did you get other messaging, like, when you went on either social media or online or in magazines, that was positive, negative, neutral, or it was just sort of quiet?
I'd say overall, every response was super positive to neutral. Like, if they were neutral, it's only because I think they were genuinely confused how this is possible. So if you don't know anything about the medical side of this and the science behind it, which we knew nothing about up until this point. It's confusing. It doesn't seem possible that you could do this. So once I explained how it works, then they were like, wow, that's incredible, and just super supportive.
Right. And who did you, so you said you spoke to your close, your family, your close friends. Was there anyone else who was involved in your decision-making process to go through this? I mean, you involved I guess your doctor or your therapist, obviously. Was there anyone else that you brought into the loop on this?
Yeah, so there's one girl that I met at a wedding.
Oh, yeah.
She's tall, thin, and blonde, super thin and very tall. And I met her randomly at a wedding, and she said to me, I'm having a baby in 2 weeks. And this is when I was pregnant with Coco. So I was like 8 months pregnant.
You're like, no, you're not.
And so I looked at her, and my mouth dropped to the floor, and I felt so embarrassed that I had that reaction, but I was so confused. So we started talking, and she told me she had some health issues and she was going to have the help of a gestational carrier. And we remained friends. And she lived in Florida, so I would see her when we went to Florida, and we remained pretty good friends. And she had a healthy baby boy using the help of a gestational carrier. And as soon as I had my hysterectomy, she was the first person I reached out to in the hospital, and she helped me through this whole process. And then we also reached out to our rabbi.
Talk about divine intervention also on that, but like right before that.
Right before Coco.
And there was no assigned seating at this wedding either.
Yeah.
There was like open seating. We just sat next to this couple.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow. That is pretty spooky.
Yeah, so she was a super, super helpful friend to have through this whole thing. And then, early on in the process, we reached out to a rabbi to see, is this kosher? What do we have to do? Because our potential carrier is not Jewish. And, are there any special accommodations we have to make? And one of the things he said, which surprised me and was actually very helpful, was he brought up the idea of, believe it or not, posting it on Facebook at some point.
Further up. Yeah, this is a little.
When things get, when things are close, when things are working out well, God willing. So at first he gave us his blessing. He said, yes, it's kosher. You can definitely do this. And here are some things I would suggest. But he was very supportive. And then he just mentioned the idea of posting on Facebook. And I wasn't even thinking that way because there were so many things we had to overcome. But he said, I think it might be a good thing for you to consider because one, it lets a lot of people know what's going on. And then two, you're just, spreading awareness. And if there's anyone else that's struggling with infertility or any other issues, it might be helpful for them to know your story. So we ended up doing that too.
I remember that. I remember the Facebook post because most people didn't know this was going on. And then you said, hey, we're expecting a baby in whatever X amount of weeks. And everyone's sort of first oh, I don't, and there's sort of the same reaction you had at the wedding, like, wait a second, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then sort of you're like, oh, and everyone's like, wow. And then I remember everyone's like, oh, that's amazing. That's so cool. And some people had known you had a hysterectomy, some people didn't know. And then, I mean, the response, at least I know communally, everyone was so excited for you guys. I mean, it was awesome. People were just so happy that you were able to do this. And I think that's, it's like you said, thinking back on it, you're almost like, I can't believe anyone wouldn't be. But when you're going through it at the time, you don't know what to expect. In terms of logistics, I mean, you're talking about just from the medical side, it actually is one of the more straightforward fertility things out there from a medical perspective. It's basically IVF. Your ovaries get stimulated, your eggs come out. It's Simon's sperm, it's your embryo genetically. And the only difference is instead of having it after it's fertilized, the IV in vitro fertilization, instead of putting the embryo back in you, it goes into the carrier. So it's really very straightforward medically, but logistically, it's obviously, it's quite a scene. So how do you, I just want to talk just the logistics of it. How do you start this process? Who do you go to? How do you choose a carrier? Who pays for this? There's there's so much that just for people who are thinking about this or aren't thinking about this, but just are curious. What are the logistics?
So for us, step one was going to RMA, which is Reproductive Medical Associates in New Jersey. And
so they're like IVF doctors, basically.
Yeah, they're IVF doctors, but they also have a huge center for gestational carriers. And they I think one of the biggest, actually.
Did we do that before? Yeah, we did that.
So the first step was a consultation, and it's all that stuff you just mentioned in a humongous packet. And they just kind of plop it in front of you and go through it for hours.
Read this. Yeah.
I'm looking, yeah,
it's like it's like tax law. It's read these 12,000 pages.
I'm like, what were we thinking? How is this going to work? So they start off by saying, look, do the IVF, retrieve your eggs, and see if you have viable embryos. Because if you don't, there's no point in moving forward.
Right.
We did that part, and that was successful. Then,
which they expected. I assume they fully expected that because you're young and healthy. This was, again, you weren't doing this because you were sick. You were doing this because you just logistically you didn't have a uterus at that time. So okay, so you do the IVF, you have embryos. That's step one.
Next, they gave us a list of agencies. Oh, we had to meet with a social worker, and that was part of the protocol. You can't move forward until you have this meeting with their therapist on staff. So we did that.
To clear you guys as parents, or to make sure that you know what you're getting into?
To kind of just see, to understand the process more, because they don't want people jumping into this if they aren't really aware of what it's going to take to do it. And I found it very helpful. I think she was an amazing person and therapist. So in that meeting, she gave us a list of agencies that hire gestational carriers. And we told her what we, would ideally like out of a carrier. And so she circled one agency and said, this is kind of like the gold standard. They are based out of New York. They're typically very, very selective about who they accept. They're usually well educated, and they're in it for the right reasons, which is interesting how they even accept carriers. That's could be a whole nother podcast. They do compensate their carriers more than some of the other agencies, but that's how they get the most qualified, if you will.
When you said you had a list of things you wanted, what were those things, and how did you even come to that? I'm just curious. Like, did you say,
sure.
I want her to be tall? Like, what was it? What were we talking about?
I think, if she had a higher education, that would be amazing. I didn't expect that, but that was, one thing that would be in a stable relationship, had a solid income that they could rely on.
These are the things that I think that Stanford reduced our wishes to, that his agency, who is Stanford is the one who runs the agency that we're referring to. I think we basically, the idea you conveyed was that we wanted to have certainty that this person that was going to carry this baby was going to be a quality person.
Someone that we could trust.
Yeah.
Basically, I don't want to be the person. And there are some people who go through this process and they say, this is what you can eat. This is what you can wear. This is how your activities. For me, I just wanted this person to be someone that was, stable and in it for the right reasons, and someone that was genuinely a person we could trust to do it. So,
right. Okay. So they sent you to this agency, and
yes.
And do you actually choose? Like, do they give you like a list of people and you choose them, or do they present someone to you and you say yes or no?
Right. So they ask all the intended parents to create a profile, and all the carriers create a profile, and then it's a match system. So Stanford, who runs this agency, he personally selects we met with him in New York City, and after meeting him, and he read our profile, and he looked over, his database, he would make a selection. If you don't like the first pick, you could say no thanks and move on to the next. The first profile we received was that of our carrier, and immediately I was just blown away. I was like, wow, she seems awesome. It's a picture of her and her husband and her 2 kids. They're from Ohio, Cincinnati. She's a special ed teacher with a master's, and he has, a great job, and they just seem like they have an amazing life. And it was just like the perfect person. And so we gave the green light on that. And then the carrier also has to give the green light that they want to be a carrier for us. So they have a right to say no. That went well. We both approved each other's profiles. And then next step was a phone call with the carrier, and that went well. And then the next step was
the 3 of you, the 2 of you and the carrier,
and I think her husband was on. Yeah, her husband was also on the call.
Uh-huh.
And,
What was that?
it
What was
was
that like? I mean, making that phone call or getting that phone call must have been pretty
right.
nerve-wracking.
So I was nervous. Simon was not. As usual, he's cracking jokes and keeping it light.
Okay.
But really, we just like had a normal conversation, like you would be calling a friend that you haven't spoken to in a while and catching up.
Well, I think at first, my memory of the first conversation is that's what it evolved to for sure. My memory of the first conversation was just, it was a little bit more stilted on both ends, not in a bad way. It's just, it was good. It was good. It was as good as you would expect two couples of strangers meeting in this situation to be.
Right. It's definitely not how you normally run into people.
No, and the first meeting was not something I could ever prepare for. No, it's just something that, there's nothing like that you could say, oh, it might be similar to this, or, oh, I have this experience under my belt that will help me. It was just such a unique set of circumstances, obviously. But again, that first meeting, which Sanford, the head of this agency, was there to moderate the meeting, which was helpful. And Simon, of course, cracking his jokes and keeping it light. But it was such an awesome meeting. It went very, very well. We were shocked.
And then there's a lot of legal issues that come into play. And I think, in terms of what states this happens in, right? I mean, how much did you know about that going into it?
Nothing. So we thought we could do it, get someone local in New Jersey or New York. Nope, it's illegal. You can't pay someone to carry a baby for you in those states. So you have to find a state where it's not only legal, but it's favorable for the intended parent, which means in some states it's legal to do this, but the carrier's name will be on the birth certificate, and which makes it complicated, right? So you have to find a state that it's not only legal in, but the intended parent, which is us, would be on the birth certificate.
Right.
And Ohio is one of those states.
Right. I mean, it's such a, I mean, I'm not a legal expert, obviously, but I know about these things, and it's such a fascinating concept because you're talking about, on the one hand, everyone knows that genetically the parents are these people, and everyone knows that in terms of who delivers the baby, who's the birth mother, so to speak, is this person. And the question is, so which one has precedence? Like, who takes priority? And traditionally they were always the same people, right? So it never really came up. And so when this started evolving, that this was a possibility, and is it, so some states say we'll consider it like an adoption. But the problem with that is, you don't want to go through this whole situation and then have the carrier deliver the baby and say, nah, I'm taking the baby home. And in those states, there's nothing you can do. Like, that's how it is. And it's so fascinating thinking about which one of those two sides is quote unquote the liberal side and which is a quote unquote conservative side, because you would think that favoring the genetic parents might be the liberal side, and someone would say, well, maybe a birth mother could be taken advantage of. And so that's why it's all over the place. It's almost random which state. It's not like red state, blue state. And if it is, it's the opposite. Like, it's almost flip of what you would think it would be. It's almost random which states you can do this in. And so a lot of people have carriers. They're like, yeah, my carrier's in Kansas, my carrier's in Wisconsin, my carrier's in Ohio. It's just whatever state sort of is agreed that they're going to do it one way versus the other states.
Yep, exactly. And there's also the other legal part of it is obviously all the contracts that you have to work on and have some pretty tough conversations ahead of time, because, you have to agree on certain things. Like, one conversation specifically is like, if God forbid there was something really, really, really wrong and abnormal, at what point, would our carrier be okay with an abortion? And is she okay with an abortion?
Who decides?
Really tough conversations. And actually, she would decide. It's medically, it's like her body. So she, regardless of whatever contract, she has to agree. But the contract just helps protect us in those situations. And it's just, it can get messy. Luckily, we were on the same page about everything, and the contracts went pretty smoothly. Not easy. Legal things were tough and costly, which is the whole thing is very costly. The big financial part of it. Thank goodness Simon works for Google. So they surprisingly cover a big chunk of it, which was huge.
Right. Because you're talking about, there's pregnancy, having a baby, then there's the IVF, right? There's
Yep.
the carrier. There's
Yep.
obviously, which comes along with an agency and, all that. And it's, listen, for someone to be a carrier, they're going to have to be paid a good amount of money. Like, this is not, it's not usually just out of the goodness of their heart. It is, but it's like, it's a big deal. And all the lawyer fees. I mean, because you're talking, it's a massive legal undertaking as well. And the cost is extraordinary. Are you comfortable sharing like approximately what it costs for a couple to go through this if they just forget about coverage, if they just had to go nuts to bolts, pay for it?
Probably around 100 to 120 grand.
It's
Wow.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Maybe more, depending on, like IVF costs different amounts in different. So there's some wiggle room on that. But it's interesting that you say, if you get a carrier who does it without being paid, because one thing this agency would not accept is carriers who say, I want to do this out of the kindness of my own heart. I don't want to accept any money. They won't accept that person because they want them to treat it like a job.
Yeah.
And they have to show up. They can't say, oh, you know what, halfway through, I'm kind of over it, but they
Yeah.
have to be accountable.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, if someone shows up and says, can I get 5,000 more, or, tries to negotiate that fee, their compensation, they also say no, because they don't want people who are in it just for the money. It has to be the right balance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only people I think who it sort of maybe works out for in that situation is if it's like, my sister is going to carry the baby, something like that, where it's just such a unique situation. But if you're talking about with strangers, that makes a lot of sense. So the decision is made, you go through all the paperwork. Does the carrier come to New Jersey for the transfer, or do the embryos go to Ohio?
So before she even comes for the transfer, she had to come to RMA in New Jersey for a full day of screening, because RMA now has to approve her. So she had to be and medically screened. Then after that, she starts her IVF, and the transfer happens back at RMA. She comes back when that's ready. And that was a very surreal experience. And then
are you there? Are you there in the room? Are you in the building? How does that work?
Yep. We were in the room with her and her husband. I'll never forget how they wheel in the embryo, and then it's like on a camera, and they take this like syringe and they suck up the embryo and show you exactly where they're putting it. And the whole time it's an out of body experience, because I just can't believe this is how we're about to get pregnant.
Right.
I'm squeezing Simon's hand so hard, and I'm crying my face off. And our carrier's husband is just like looking at me, just like in shock, because I'm in shock and emotional. And I think it was just a very surreal experience.
I was just like, science.
Like, this is not how it happened last time. None of these people were in the room with us.
You don't know that, maybe. You don't know.
It's a good point. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. That's an assumption. Were those people in the room with you? Wow. And so is that in terms of, for that, and I was going to ask you also for like prenatal visits and this, is the decision regarding you guys being like in the room at the visits for the procedures, is that up to the carrier? Is it up to the contract? Is it different in every situation? Like, how are those, like, what if the carrier said, I just don't want them in the room when I'm having the transfer? Is that even an option? Who makes those decisions?
That was actually something we discussed, I think, in one of our meetings with Stanford. And that came up, just what was going to be her comfort level, my comfort level, and also what legally we could do, because we had to sign some documents, like HIPAA related stuff that,
because it's her, it's her health, it's her body.
It's her health. It had nothing to do with me, like zero according to HIPAA, which is so crazy.
These were very early stage conversations with the carrier and her family, her husband. And, we covered off on doctor visits and her willingness to just be open about that, which probably isn't always the case, but our carrier was amazing. And then the bigger question was really whether we'd be in the room for the delivery itself, which was its kind of own specific case amongst this broader situation.
Right. I mean, because I was saying that, like, the relationship you have with the carrier is obviously going to be different in every circumstance. And I would think that the stronger the relationship, like you said, in terms of trust, in terms of respect, in terms of, potentially love. I mean, that those are going to make these decisions different. And that is something that some of it's a leap of faith and some of it's doing research and some of it's meeting people in advance. What was your relationship like with the carrier throughout the course of the pregnancy?
So one quick story for you. When we first met our carrier in Ohio for that initial meeting, one of the very first questions, she's not Jewish. One of the very first questions she asked us was,
after we told our story.
Okay,
Yes,
fine. We told our story. Yeah. So we introduced ourselves. We told our story. And one of the first questions she asked was, do you want me to eat kosher food during the pregnancy? And
Wow.
I just thought that was so telling of what kind of person this is. In that moment, she was already thinking, like, what can I do to make sure this process is as comfortable for them? Meanwhile, I'm thinking the entire time, what can I do to make this most comfortable for her? And I think that's just so indicative of the relationship we had the entire time. There was this tremendous level of respect and trust and admiration and love and just like for one another that it blossomed into something so unique and special that I really did not imagine going into it.
Is that something that, in your understanding, is typical, or is that quite atypical for other people going through this?
So I only know like one or two other close accounts of people who did this. I think they had different relationships with their carrier. I'm a much more open person, so like whoever close with, I'm just like very close with them. And obviously in this situation, I just wanted to feel like I feel indebted and just like so close with this person that I would be willing to do anything for them.
I'll add a little color. The color I would add is just Juan Sanford from the agency we used, NAFG. He was pretty open about the fact that he thought we had a great relationship that was pretty unique with our carrier and her husband. I kind of felt like I didn't say this, but I was like, hey, it's been so easy working with both sides of this. Like, do you think we could get a small discount for this? Because, like, it's probably made things a lot easier for you, hasn't it?
I didn't. Too. He didn't have to jump in and do any mediation between us.
No,
it was very easy.
We went out to lunch and dinner with them every time we got together. We were going to be in the same area. So we're getting together, outside of just the medical procedure or medical reasons, which was really nice. And we always had like a long lunch or a long dinner, great conversation. That was fun.
Wow.
So
it's amazing.
That was pretty different. Yeah.
I mean, they sound, your carrier and her husband sound like you said, really amazing people. And many of our listeners don't know you guys, but you're both so warm and affectionate, and you have big smiles on your faces, and you're very comfortable to be around. And so I think that obviously it goes both ways. I'm sure they sensed right away in you two how much love you have to give and how much love you give, the two children you had at the time, and what kind of parents you are and were going to be to this baby. And I'm sure they were drawn to you in the same way that you were drawn to them. It's just it's a great match. It sounds like, ideal in this situation to have a carrier that that you really like. It's unbelievable. And vice versa. I mean, it just makes the whole process so much, more uplifting that this is happening this way.
We definitely lucked out for sure.
I think this was one of your biggest concerns. If I remember correctly, Adina, you were like, what kind of relationship could we have with this person? And I remember saying to you, like, this has the potential to be an amazing relationship that we couldn't even imagine being possible. Yeah, and I think it was very hard. I think it was hard because you always saw yourself in that role. Mm-hmm. So having someone else play that role for you felt like a big stretch, but it was really cool. Yeah. It was.
I mean, it can go wrong. I've unfortunately been in the middle of a situation with a patient and the carrier where the relationship was horrible, and it was combative, and lawyers had to get involved. It was just awful, and there's so many ways this can go wrong. People can have disagreements. They don't they're not on the same page if there's a complication, or maybe someone either is or feels like they're taking advantage of the carrier. I mean, or vice versa with money. I mean, there's so many ways this can go south, this type of relationship, because it's not a typical relationship. There aren't rules for this. There isn't, precedent. And it's just, this is all new. And the world is figuring this all out. And I think you guys, I don't want to say you lucked out, because it wasn't just luck. It's who you are and what kind of people you are and what kind of preparation you did and how you entered this. But I think it was a very fortunate way to go through this and with your carrier. And so what ultimately happened with the delivery? How did that, you said that was going to be a question mark.
On August 23rd of 2019, she had a scheduled C-section, and it was in Cincinnati, Ohio. All her OB appointments were there. So we went a couple days early, and, just in case she was going to go into labor naturally, and she didn't. She made it to the scheduled C-section. And so typically in surgery, they only allow one person into the room. And I wasn't going to bring it up. I felt like it should be her husband. There's no reason why I need to be in the room. I'd rather her be comfortable and have her husband by her side than me necessarily being in there. Although I was happy to be in the room if that was an option, but I wasn't going to push for it. And so her husband, day of the operation, said to 3 or 4 different nurses and staff there at the hospital, is it possible, can we please get all 4 of us in the room, our carrier,
right,
himself, and then 2 of us. And they kept saying, well, let me check, let me see if that's an option.
Had that hospital done deliveries for carriers before? Is that something that the hospital's used to?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
They were.
There was still a little bit. There were a couple.
They had done a couple. They had done a couple.
So so not like a routine event there, but it wasn't their first.
Yes, I was not the first.
Nurses that didn't know exactly the protocol for
right.
the situation.
Right. So then eventually I think the anesthesiologist might have made the call, and he said, yes, that will be fine. They set up chairs for us.
Oh, that's so nice.
It was a humongous room. I mean,
6 times the size of the room that you had.
It's not New York City. We got to say the real estate, man.
It was really crazy.
Did you guys have any, and I'm just curious, but I'm interrupting you, but I want you to finish. But just in that moment, did you have any concerns about, or when it actually happened that you walked in that room, either of you, any like PTSD from walking into an operation, like a C-section again, based on what happened the last time, when you were the patient? Or did that sort of like, it was not even on your radar because you were so focused on what was going on with your baby?
I think I had just such a positive mindset. Everything had gone so well up until this point. Every single box was checked off at every single stage, right? And we never, thank God, had to do anything twice. And it was just like moving on from one thing to the next. So
the carrier's doctor was awesome.
Oh my gosh. We had met the carrier's doctor multiple times because of all the visits. And I just felt like I had to believe it was going to go well. And yes, was I nervous and shaking? Because, when you have the medicine from a C-section, you can get very jittery and cold. So I got all those feelings back, even though I wasn't getting the medicine. So I'm shaking and I'm jittery, and Simon, I squeezed Simon's hand, and Simon started to dive in, and I just felt like you were saying a couple on the way into the room, and I just felt like this is meant to be. Like, this is going to work, and it's meant to be. And I was just kept it positive. And then also her husband was like smiling and feeling good. Everyone was feeling good. And so I just wanted to keep that positive attitude because it's out of your control, right? At this point, and just hope for the best.
Wow. Okay. So go on. So you go into the room and they start, and tell me how that went.
So I remember us being on, like, it was surreal because we were on these 2 folding chairs, maybe like 10 feet back from the situation and from the operation. And we can see on both sides of the curtain, and we could see the carrier and her husband, and her face and her husband comforting her. And then we could also see all the work that the doctors were doing. We could hear everything that they were saying and doing. And I had my camera out and I was really recording the whole thing. And I just remember when they pulled him out, and it was like, I'll be honest, because I remember the thing that I remember most, aside from just like my wife being so excited and holding my hand and so happy, was I remember this sense right before that of like, like I don't know. I was like, how am I going to grasp the moment? Like, what is like the nowness of this and the gravity of the situation? I was like, is this hitting me enough? And I felt the nerves. But as soon as they pulled the baby out and then we heard him breathe and make some sound, it like hit me in a positive way so hard. I was like, it was like the end of a marathon. I've never run a marathon. Dina has, so she can actually confirm that. But spiritually and emotionally, it was the end of that part, that leg. Really, it's a multi-year, multi-leg marathon because it's obviously the beginning of this kid's life. But it really just felt like what a redemptive story to be back in that room and be at a C-section and have it be at the finish line. It was quite breathtaking, and we have video of it, which shows us and the carrier and the baby and the doctors, and it was joyous.
It's amazing. It's just unbelievable. And how long did it take for you to then travel home?
We also then like moved to feeling some concern for the carrier and her recovery. And what was really cool before we actually went home is that we actually spent a decent amount of time with the carrier, and I remember you feeling a little conflicted about whether how much to show the baby to the carrier.
So this is interesting. So we had a conversation with Sanford, who sort of acted a little bit as our lawyer, even though he was neutral. He gave some legal advice. Not he gave some advice. This is not legal. He just gave advice. One of the things he said was how to prepare for that time in the hospital. Obviously, when baby comes out, I wanted to do skin to skin immediately as soon as baby was ready to for me to hold him. And then some things he addressed was, how much time to allow the carrier to hold the baby, and just very unique set of things to think about.
Yeah.
I guess in some cases, the carrier has a lot of hormones and a lot of feelings, and there's a lot that just happened, and they might feel like, that could change their heart. You don't know. You don't know. Worst case scenario. So the idea that like you would never leave the baby alone with the carrier, but definitely offer to allow the carrier to hold the baby, just a bunch of things. Thankfully, everything worked out beautifully. I mean, it was supernatural, and there was never really a reason to be concerned, but it was just a very interesting thing to think about.
A lot of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty.
Well, there was this last thing on this because it was so unique. What made it so unique, it was like almost for this really intimate and powerful big milestone, like our families came together for a little bit. Like, and this was like, she had her kids there and we hadn't met them before. And she had her husband's parents were there, her in-laws were there. And it was like, we were kind of all hanging out together. And it was just like, we came from such different backgrounds, but got along so well. It just felt like I have no English word for this. Well, it just felt like a bracha. Like it just felt like a blessing that it was like this amazing coming together, and it was just felt so cool. It was so cool.
And they got to see, I mean, all these people in her life, her family got to see what she did for you, right? It's a moment where they say, look at what mom did, look what my wife did, look what my daughter did, that she gave this gift to this wonderful family. And it also means more that they get to know who you are. It's not just a random family that she gave this gift to, that she, that they have to meet you and they say, this beautiful family now has another son because of what she did. And I think that it just makes it, again, if the relationship is solid, it makes it, like you said, like that bond is so strong that you're connected in that way. And it does sound unique. And you're still in touch with her?
We text, on occasion. I'll give her some updates about Joey, but mostly we stay in touch through social media because she'll post things and I'll post things, and it's nice. We definitely keep in touch.
It's amazing. And so when did Joey ultimately come home? How many days old was he?
I think it was 2 or 3 days later. So our carrier recovered in one day from the C-section. She was released from the hospital before Joey was released. So it was really crazy. She was up and walking like the next day. I mean, she's just literally, physically and emotionally and mentally the strongest person I know. But So we left 2 or 3 days later, maybe, and just drove home, which took about 9 or 10 hours. We made a couple stops, and
then you met your kids.
it was the cutest welcoming. Cooper was excited, but Coco was just over. She has not. So Joey's almost 1. She has not stopped kissing him since the moment we brought him home.
It's amazing.
And just the amount of love they both have for him, but Coco just expresses it in really such a beautiful way.
What do they know? What do your kids know about how this all happened, and sort of what is your expectation for how you explain it to them, or how they're going to explain it to their friends potentially? I mean, obviously with adults, like you said, you tell people, like, oh my God, that's awesome. And, everyone, I know the response has been so positive, but, kids are weird, like young kid, like, their friends, like, what? And so is that something that you think about, you prepare them for? You're just like, we'll deal with it when they get older. How do you sort of think about that?
The social worker that we met with through RMA gave us a list of children's books on gestational carriers. Examples are like The Kind Koala or The Kangaroo's Pouch. The Kangaroo's Pouch was just such a good one because it's such a visual for them, right? Like we all have pouches.
Right.
And this kangaroo's pouch didn't work, but a friend's pouch worked. And so the friend carried the baby for this family. Very simple. I was reading these books to the kids for months and months before Simon and I came to the decision that we were going to pursue this.
Okay.
And I didn't tell them my story. I just gave them the information and said, families are built in different ways. And isn't that so cool that families can do these different things to become a family? And how boring of a world would it be if we were all the same and everyone did the same thing and looked the same and whatever. So it was just this cool conversation that we would have, quite frequently. And then when we announced, we came back from Ohio at the 20-week visit and we told the kids. And I said, guess what, guys? We're having a baby. And Cooper was 5. Yeah. He was about 5. He looked at me and said, is someone having it for us? That's what he said. Someone's having the baby for us? And I said, yes. And he said, who? And then we had this whole conversation about our carrier and our family. And it was very powerful, very powerful.
Wow. It's really amazing. And if you were, if there are people out there who are considering this themselves, now that you've, gone through this whole journey and where you are now, what advice would you have for them in terms of like do's and don'ts, whether they're, logistical things or whether they're sort of emotional things or higher level things? What would you tell to someone if you were that tall woman at the wedding and, someone called you and said, hey, I'm so glad we met, I'm considering doing this. What would be your first list of things to sort of help them through this?
I think it's something Simon told me to get us started in the process. And he said, let's take this one step at a time. And if at any point we're not comfortable with this, we don't have to go through this whole thing. Let's just start, see where we're at, and then take it, because it's such an overwhelming process. My advice would be just take it one step at a time.
Simon, what about you? I know that was your advice, but do you have any other advice?
We have a bunch of other do's and don'ts here, so that's not the only one.
Another thing that I found very helpful was reaching out to family and friends or anyone you would trust, whether that's therapists, a rabbi, any support groups. For me, I quickly realized that so many people are going through something. It might not be the same thing, but it might be similar. And it was very comforting to know that you're not alone, and just having someone to talk to felt very therapeutic and reassuring. So that was definitely another piece of advice for people who might want to go through this.
Wow. And what is this big picture from the start of your, of this journey till now? What have you taken away from this in terms of just life itself? I mean, you've said so much already that's so meaningful and, deep about family, about relationships, about, hope and about grief. But is there anything sort of like big picture you look back, you're like, this experience has taught me X?
I think it's taught me that babies are absolutely worth it. And whatever it takes, there's no greater joy than having a baby and a family, and basically to try everything, whatever is within your means. Try everything, because there's really nothing more worth it than family.
On my end, it taught me a lot about expectations, and that, we have a certain expectation for things to go a certain way sometimes. And that those expectations can really, they can cause a lot of pain, they can cause a lot of suffering, because we want things to be a certain way, and they're, that's just not how it's going. You have to kind of work with what you're given, and work with the tools that you have. And there's so many medical tools to help us, to help somebody in our situation, that it's really keeping in mind what the goal is, what you're trying to do in this world, and have a family and have children. Medicine really was a humongous help, and that our expectations didn't need to be the way they were.
And I don't want to forget to mention just the amount of kindness and selflessness that our carrier displayed just by doing this for us, and doing it with a smile, and never complaining even when things got hard, because pregnancy is hard. Yeah. And it was such a big lesson to me to see that she had something to offer. And it just made me realize, like, what can I do to help someone else? Like, what do I have that can make a huge difference for someone else? And how can I be more giving and more compassionate toward others who might need help?
Yeah, I'm just building on that. It's just the gratitude, the chain of events, and the gratitude dominoes that fell over in each step of the process, from the doctors and the nurses that helped us, from the IVF part of the process, all the way through, and with Sanford, and with our carrier and her husband, and the nurse, her doctor, the doctors in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was really amazing. And we really felt that gratitude, because people really cared, and they were really just kind.
Wow, guys, this is amazing. I'm so thankful that you agreed to come on. I think that, number one, your story, just on the face of it, is so interesting and uplifting and wonderful. But also, I think for so many people, it's going to be helpful to know that people go through this, and there are options, and it can be done in a way that's, although, difficult, and, sometimes, trying, that it can work out beautifully, and that people, shouldn't give up hope and should consider what this is. And I think that not everyone is as open to talking about their own story as much. And I think that the fact that you're willing to do this, and so eloquent and so upbeat about it, is amazing. I mean, you guys know that, Michal and I, that, we adore you guys. We always have, even before all this happened. And it's just, there's a reason why. You're wonderful people, and you're unique. And thank God you have a beautiful family. You had a beautiful family, and you still have a beautiful family. And we're just so happy for you that this is, how your journey has taken you to this point. And I know my listeners are going to just fall in love with you guys.
Oh, that's so sweet. It really was a pleasure. It's been always so much fun chatting with you.
Thanks.
Awesome, guys. Thank you for listening to the Healthful Woman podcast. To learn more about our podcast, please visit our website at www.healthfulwoman.com. That's HEALTHFULWOMAN.com. If you have any questions about this podcast or any other topic you would like us to address, please feel free to email us at hw@healthfulwoman.com. Have a great day. The information discussed in Healthful Woman is intended for educational uses only and does not replace medical care from your physician. Healthful Woman is meant to expand your knowledge of women's health and does not replace ongoing care from your regular physician or gynecologist. We encourage you to speak with your doctor about specific diagnoses and treatment options for an effective treatment plan.